Good morning, everybody. Our apologies for the slight delay. I think newsroom, do you want to, maybe the thing is falling apart here. Newsroom.
Do some maintenance.
I
You
think
can see that microphone, you can feel it. It's Kadazemba.
I think it's
Okay.
a little bit limp.
Thank you.
Microphone's had enough of the year. 23 must fall.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very, very much for joining us for our annual parliamentary review press conference. As I said, we do apologize for the slight delay. My name is Siviwe Gwarube. I'm the DA's chief whip. And this morning I'm joined by the DA leader, John Steenhuisen. I'm also joined by our leader in the NCOP, Cathy Labuschagne. And I'm also joined by the deputy chief whip of the DA, Dr. Annelie Lotriet. And so we're going to be taking turns to go through some sections of our presentation this morning. And of course, as per usual, you are free to ask some questions afterwards. The South Africa Sixth Parliament has been the most challenging yet in our country's democratic dispensation in a post-Zuma world where the intricate machinery of state capture was dismantled and laid bare before all of us to see. In the Zondo Commission in its report, it was Parliament itself that was implicated as one of the enablers of the rampant corruption under the ANC, and the ramifications of which have seen that the parliamentary reform agenda has not really been fulfilled. However, much like the Fifth Parliament that preceded it, South Africa's Sixth Parliament saw a return of the political abuse by the ANC to stifle oversight, institute cover-ups, and a culture of executive protection, and essentially stop the ability of members of Parliament to do their work, which is holding the executive to account. In this climate of ANC unaccountability, Parliament also labored under COVID-19, the pandemic which saw a national shutdown across the country, which centralized extensive power within the executive under the Disaster Management Act and made no provision whatsoever for parliamentary oversight during this time. Often decisions were taken by the COVID-19 task team under the presidency, and none of these decisions were subject to parliamentary oversight. As a result, the lockdown gave unfettered powers to the president and his cabinet, many of which were abused and exploited for political gain. A raft of irrational restrictions were imposed in South Africa, and yet no parliamentary committee had the powers to oversee it. Furthermore, during this term, we saw corruption in the procurement of personal protection equipment during COVID-19, which further demonstrated to the public how uncaring and exploitative the nature of the ANC government had become. It was for this reason that the DA challenged the constitutionality of the Disaster Management Act in court, and we await for a favorable judgment to ensure that should we ever need to use the Disaster Management Act again, that in fact there is parliamentary oversight so that we can make sure that what we saw under COVID-19 does not happen again. In a second blow to Parliament, the fire which decimated parts of the National Assembly and the precinct in 2022 made it impossible for members of Parliament to move back and for them to have in-person sittings. This further hampered Parliament's ability to conduct its business, and we still have no real tangible completion date in sight. But perhaps the biggest failure of the Sixth Parliament was the suboptimal performance of the National Executive under President Ramaphosa, who himself evaded Parliament and treated it much in the same way. And so much in the same way as his predecessor. With relation to the fire, we have just seen the investigation which was conducted by Parliament, but this investigation is yet to be tabled before any parliamentary committee. We are yet to be able to see who is implicated and for what reason, and what what is going to be done with those people who have been implicated. And so that is what we are still waiting for. Now I'm going to hand over to John, essentially to go through the President and the Cabinet performance section.
Thank you very much, Chief Whip, and thank you very much for those who are here today and, of course, those who are watching online. For all of his great promises of reform upon his election, President Ramaphosa has not tabled a single piece of legislation that he can point to as a signature piece of legislation to entrench the so-called New Dawn. That New Dawn has since disappeared like the morning mist, and every major leader who comes to office on the promise of reform brings with them a raft of legislation which they then move through the parliamentary process. The New Dawn and the promises contained therein are not codified in a single piece of legislation in South Africa. The President has not tabled a single piece of legislation to grow our economy, to solve the energy crisis, put more food on our tables, or give hope to the millions more who have joined the unemployment queue over the last 5 years. If ever we needed a demonstration of the clear paralysis of the Ramaphosa administration, this is it. And the Sixth Parliament will always bear testament to the reduction of Cyril Ramaphosa as a mere bystander to South Africa's many failures. In the Sixth Parliament, President Ramaphosa also centralized an increasing number of state functions, such as state security, into the presidency, while creating a Minister of Electricity in the presidency. The operations of Parliament have no oversight of this. This culture of secrecy, of unaccountability, serves neither the Parliament nor the people of South Africa and their interests. And as we've seen, the many heady promises made from the President all the way down to Mr. Mbalula, who promised us that by December load shedding would be a thing of the past, have turned to nothing. And it is precisely the culture of secrecy and unaccountability that allows them to get away with it. In terms of the Cabinet's performance, one only needs to look at a variety of the metrics and indicators, both locally and internationally, spelling out South Africa's decline. The DA's motion of no confidence, which was tabled in Cabinet after the State of the Nation address, was shot down by the ANC, once again seeking to protect non-performing ministers from accountability. The President has repeatedly promised Parliament and the people of South Africa to conduct lifestyle audits on the National Executive, but these have never been carried out. But perhaps the most glaring cover-up of ANC failure and non-performance is the issue of the fact that the President now refuses to make public the performance agreement assessments as a result of the performance agreements that he signed with ministers. And I think that this impacts particularly on Parliament, because our Constitution is very clear about to whom ministers and deputy ministers are accountable. And it is clearly set out in section 92(1) of the Constitution, and I quote, "The deputy president and ministers are responsible for the powers and functions of the executive assigned to them by the president." But it goes on in section 2 to indicate that members of the Cabinet are accountable collectively and individually to Parliament for the exercise of their powers and the performance of their functions. It's thus completely disingenuous for President Ramaphosa to claim that making public the performance assessments of Cabinet ministers will embarrass them. It's not the publication of the performance assessment of his ministers that will embarrass him. It is the non-performance that should embarrass him and should embarrass the entire executive. It is fundamentally in the interests of transparency and accountability, as demanded by our Constitution, that Parliament and the people know how their government and how the various ministers have performed, particularly as we go into an election period where voters in South Africa should have the opportunity to judge for themselves the performance of the variety of ministers and then inform their voting choices in that election. As a result of this failure to produce these performance assessments, the Democratic Alliance will be submitting a Promotion of Access to Information Act application to each ministry of the National Executive to obtain the full performance assessment of each of the ministers. The explanatory guidelines of each performance agreement signed by each minister detail the creation and implementation of performance targets. the drafting of report cards on performance progress with supporting evidence provided by the departments, the tabling of risk assessments and emerging policy issues, including key actions taken to address them, the provision of metrics and data to the presidency to gauge ministerial performance, and a process to convene meetings between the president and a minister to discuss any suboptimal performance. These are all the exercise of public duty. These are all the exercise of public power, and therefore it makes sense that these are publicly available. And that is why we fundamentally believe that this information belongs in the public domain. And we will ensure that South Africans can see for themselves the performance of their government, and also to see how much the ANC has truly bettered the lives of South Africans over the past term, and how many people they've pushed into the unemployment queue, how many people they've left to starve, how many children suffer from malnutrition as a result of the acts of omission and commission by a cabinet who should be embarrassed in their performance. Should this information be withheld, we've already announced that we will institute court action to obtain this. South Africans deserve to know the truth about what our president really thinks of his ministers, and after all of their dismal failures throughout the years, why he retains them in the cabinet, where they can continue to wreak havoc in the economy and continue to cause suffering in the lives of ordinary South Africans. And most importantly, whether he actually has the spine to take the requisite action against them. I'm now going to hand over to Cathy Labuschagne, our leader in the National Council of Provinces, the upper house, to take us through the issues relating to the NCOP. Thank you. Pardon?
Good morning. In the National Council of Provinces, we're looking back at the beginning of the 6th Parliament, and we have to acknowledge that the functioning of the National Council of Parliament and Parliament as a whole has been influenced by the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the National Assembly's fire. The NCOP, however, mainly represents the provinces by participating in the national legislative process and to ensure that provincial interests are taken into account in the national sphere of government. These programs on paper provided the NCOP with the will of the people, but the political power and the political will to implement evidence-based change unfortunately remains lacking in the NCOP. We can only hope that the ushering of the 7th Parliament will nullify the words of the Zondo report, that the NCOP is not fulfilling its oversight role and that its tag as a toothless rubber stamp of the NA is being removed. Our oral questions sessions to the presidency has been focused on obtaining commitments from the president and the deputy president on key issues impacting South Africans, from the president making commitments to the following things: ensure better participation in the steering committees by SAPs, prioritize witness protection programs, and prioritize specialized prosecution with the Minister of Police and Justice respectively in combating the construction mafia. The Deputy President also accepted the DA's NCOP's request for him to visit eThekwini so that he can see the real eThekwini, as it became evident in the Deputy President's oral question sessions that he was under an illusion as to the state of the municipality. It is imperative that the Deputy President, and by extension the whole executive, knows the state South Africans are living in, and the only way to do that is to be on the ground. And that is exactly what the DA NCOP intends on doing when the Deputy President takes up this invitation that he expected. The DA NCOP is proud of its role in the DA's fight against the rising cost of living, and in our one and only sponsored debate this year, we chose the focus of this vital issue affecting all South Africans. Our debate was opened and closed by the DA Gauteng Premier candidate, Solly Msimang, and he was joined by the DA Free State Premier candidate, Roy Jankelson, the Western Cape Minister of Infrastructure and the DA leader in the Western Cape, Tasha Simmers, and the Western Cape Minister of Agriculture, Ivan Meyer. Our speakers painting a grim picture for all South Africans, but also showing how the DA is assisting the most vulnerable, as well as to aid the most vulnerable the DA has been advocating for, specifically the zero-rated VAT items. Ministerial briefings, which history is based in the period of the COVID pandemic, where there was a lack of oversight, are ultimately meant to provide more information in addition to committees in the NCOP. However, with the majority of ANC initiatives, they only work on paper. These briefings were glorified talk shops. We had in these briefings the opportunity to raise questions, but as the answers were always a repeat of the things that we already know. The DI in the NCOP fought throughout 2022 to have these briefings decreased because it encroached on our time of debates as well as select committee work. And it seems as if the presiding officers agreed with the DA, as in this year, in 2023, we only had 2 of these ministerial briefing sessions. The NCOP, being the only house that deals with interventions at Parliament, there are processes in place to effectively deal with interventions. However, when interventions, particularly Section 139 interventions, that's focusing on local government, are implemented, majority are based on political interference instead of ensuring and supporting local government to become capable and effective governments in delivering services to all citizens. Legislation in the NCOP in the past term, only 9 pieces of Section 76 legislation have been passed. And as we draw a close to this chapter of our democracy, our 6th Parliament, it is clear that there is plenty of work to be done within the NCOP to achieve its full potential. However, the DA within the NCOP will keep on striving towards an NCOP that delivers on its mandate as we reaffirm our commitments to democratic values, constitutionality, the rule of law, a growing social market economy, and a South Africa for all. I will now hand over to Annelie or to Siviwe on the key bills and votes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cathy. The 6th Parliament was certainly meant to usher in a period of reform and efficiency, especially after the Zondo Commission and the reports that were tabled in Parliament laid to bear how Parliament was found wanting throughout this period and throughout the period of state capture. However, this did not happen. In fact, the ANC continuously decided to close ranks on particularly important votes that we brought to Parliament. And especially when we brought issues like establishing ad hoc committees to look at the ESCOM corruption that had come to the fore, looking at particular ad hoc committees to have an oversight role on the minister in the presidency, the Minister of Electricity. All of these really rational recommendations and proposals that we brought to Parliament were shot down for no particular reason. We saw the ANC also abuse its majority again to shield President Ramaphosa from accountability when they voted down the parliamentary process to institute impeachment proceedings against the president following the Phala issue on his farm. The ANC simply had no reason to shut this process down. Parliament had initiated the Section 89 process, and the independent panel was appointed by the executive authority, but in consultation with political parties. There was no reason why the president did not want an open process to lay out his set of facts. And to this day, we are still, as Parliament, none the wiser about what has happened on that farm and how other state players were also implicated in that robbery. Similarly, the ANC pushed through the appointment of Advocate Koleka Gcaleka as the DA. We had essentially called for the process to begin again because we were of the view that we had not yet found a public protector that would be beyond reproach, as we had said about the previous public protector. We also saw the ANC bulldoze the NHI bill through the Portfolio Committee on Health. The bill is now before the NCOP, and we saw historically a scenario where 15 minutes before a vote on the bill was meant to take place, where the bill was pulled from the order paper following a letter that had been received by the Deputy President. Despite the fact that we are, obviously, our opposition to this bill is well recorded, the reality is that we cannot be led by the nose by the executive on the business of Parliament. It is unfathomable that an order on the order paper can be essentially taken down because of a phone call, which the members of the NCOP are still none the wiser about what that letter says. And if there's one thing that we really pushed for in Parliament as a Democratic Alliance was to make Parliament relevant to ordinary South Africans. It was very, very important for us that this institution is not just simply separated and essentially distant from the plight of ordinary South Africans. And the ANC continuously showed us that they simply don't care about the fact that families on average are skipping 1 meal a day because they cannot afford them. We brought this issue before Parliament because these are the issues that Parliament should be concerned with. The fact that SASSA beneficiaries do not get paid on time or at all. We again brought this matter before Parliament. We also sought to bring the matter of 42% of South Africans being unemployed before the House for, again, debate and resolution. That patients in public hospitals have been waiting for a period of years for certain procedures. We brought again this matter to Parliament because Parliament is yet again meant to be the arena where we are meant to be debating and finding solutions to issues facing ordinary South Africans. We saw in the last 2 years that fuel prices had been skyrocketing, with the poorest suffering the most. Once again, we brought this matter before this House. We came up with solutions on how to shield the poorest from the harsh conditions of the skyrocketing cost of living crisis by asking the Minister of Finance to essentially review the basket of goods that are zero VAT rated. Again, this was also ignored. The load shedding crisis, which is costing hundreds of millions of rands per day, was also brought before the House. The tax base, which is even shrinking even further, was once again brought before this House. But one of the also most notable scandals of this term has also had to be the Russian Lady R vessel, which docked in Simonstown on the 6th of December 2022, which allegedly offloaded and loaded unverified goods. Again, the DA essentially put pressure on the president to eventually announce a 3-member body to investigate the circumstances surrounding this. Because once again, Parliament ought to be appraised of some of these things that are happening in government. The ANC, again, this is one of the issues that we brought really spiritedly in Parliament regarding the cozy relationship that the ANC continues to have with Russia, warning that the stance of the South African government in the Russia-Ukraine war was threatening South Africa's standing in the international community and would be threatening South Africa in terms of its standing in the AGOA trade agreement. We repeatedly warned that it would be the poorest of the poor who are to suffer if these trade agreements do not continue. Once again, we brought this matter to the House for essentially trying to bring this matter before the Parliament in order for resolution. Continuing in the crisis of trade relations, It is once again, we brought this matter before the House, that we saw the mismanagement of ports and rail, which has seen multinational companies considering pulling the plug from South Africa over the increased delays of loading and unloading containers. The DA leader and our colleague in the portfolio went to conduct oversight at the Durban port to see for themselves why so many containers were stuck there. We have written to Parliament to ask that the portfolio committee be the one that conducts an oversight visit so that they can interact with port management, so that they can have a clear understanding of what the issues are. Once again, inexplicably so, that oversight visit was pulled from the program. So what is clear is that what we sought to do, which is to bring the ordinary plight of ordinary South Africans to be the business of Parliament, is something that we are incredibly proud of. However, we were still met with resistance, and the ANC using its numbers to block these things from coming to a resolution. And now Dr. Lotriet is going to go through what are some of our key takeaways from this term in terms of what we were able to achieve in spite of the ANC's continued shutting down of accountability.
Good morning, everyone. During this parliamentary term, the DA stood together and as a united and a diverse team, utilizing all the mechanisms for accountability and transparency. Although we have achieved many things, I would like to highlight some of the notable achievements from the DA. We held government to account on its handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. We also launched a parliamentary inquiry into the former public protector's fitness to hold office, and this gave way to the Section 194 inquiry and her subsequent impeachment. We also held this Parliament accountable for its failure to implement the resolutions of the State Capture Commission. And we held the President accountable through the Section 89 inquiry to investigate the Phala scandal. And we fought against regressive legislation, such as the Section 25 process focusing on land expropriation without compensation, the NHI, as well as the Bella Bill. But we didn't only express ourselves in our opposition to legislation submitted and tabled in Parliament. We also brought forward a legislative agenda focused on the needs of South Africans, and we did this by means of introducing a number of private members' bills, and I'm just going to go through a few of them. We have the End Cadre Deployment Bill, the Cut Cabinet Perks Bill, and the Remuneration of Public Office Bearers Amendment Bill to repeal cadre deployment and right-size and professionalize the public service. The Children's Amendment Bill to protect the well-being of children in early childhood development facilities. Very important, the Responsible Spending Bill to limit our national debt on the fiscus, reprioritizing government spending towards longer-term economic growth and social upliftment. We also introduced the Anti-Land Invasion Bill to criminalize those who intentionally incite land invasions. The Cyber Commission Bill to create another Chapter 9 institution, the Cyber Commission to protect citizens from cyber attacks. And then very aptly and timeously now with the elections next year, 3 coalition bills to regulate coalition governments in all spheres of government. And then also legislation to create the Scorpions 2.0 to investigate and prosecute corruption. And the reality is that it has only been the DA which has kept the ANC in check over the last 5 years. Without the DA in the opposition benches, the truth is the ANC would have run rampant in its abuse of state funds, lack of transparency, and failed economic policies. In fact, it was the DA that posed 8,830, or 58% of parliamentary questions to the ANC cabinet to keep them in check and to report any abuses of power. It was these questions that exposed a plethora of wrongdoing and absolute negligence from our government. And let me highlight a few of these. Eskom, Denel, SAA and Transnet, receiving a combined 232.8 billion rand in bailouts since 2019. The Health Department oversaw the carelessness of 12,000 unnatural infant deaths in its care. 27.7 billion rand being spent on burning diesel in order to keep the lights on. This amounts to more than 25% of the entire SAPS budget that is supposed to keep us safe. The NHI will fail dismally as the public sector experiences 18,100 shortages in medical staff. And the SAPS reservist program has dropped from 52,054 in 2011-12 to only 3,502 in 2023. That is just plain shocking. And I would now like to hand over to Siviwe for the final word.
Thank you, Annelie. And so as we conclude, it is clear that until Parliament is rebuilt in 2025, we will not be able to see a properly functioning Parliament. Despite the fact that the fire almost took place 2 years ago, we are still yet to find the real reason, the cause behind the fire, and who all is going to be held accountable. But more importantly, I do want to stress and thank the DA caucus for the past 5 years, because I believe in the past 5 years we have continued to be the blueprint of robust opposition. We were constructive, we were democratic, we were vigilant, and we were proactive. It was very, very important for us to reorientate the way in which South Africans see Parliament, that they see Parliament for a place of refuge as opposed to a place where politicians go to work. And that has been incredibly important for us in this term. And we also demonstrated our readiness to govern. It is our view that we are likely to see an ANC overwhelming majority in the 7th Parliament. And so it was important that in the work that we do, in the legislation that we put forward, we demonstrate that we are ready to govern, and essentially we're ready for an ANC that has a reduced majority in the 7th Parliament. The next Parliament will definitely be the first one where we are likely to see an opposition bloc that will probably be able to push legislation that will really better the lives of South Africans, that will be able to make the real appointments that are needed to improve the daily lives of South Africans. South Africans will need a strong DA that will protect our democracy so that we can rescue South Africa from the dismal governance of the ANC government. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to facilitate the question and answer session from all of you. And you can just indicate your name, your media house, and who you would like to direct your question to. I'll start with Lindsay and Lulu.
Thanks, Siviwe. Dr. Lotriet did touch on some of it, but this Parliament has not been successful in getting any private member's bill through the House. What is it going to take? Is it a political shift, an ideology to look beyond the boundaries of political differences and look at the intentions of legislation? I know Dr. Lotriet still has an electoral bill hanging before a committee right now. What is it going to take? And is it a futile exercise to continue to present private members' bills that never get off the ground? Thanks.
Thank you. Lulu? I'll take 3 and then I'll allocate them.
SABC. You're saying that the ANC pushed through the process of appointing Kollega Galega when the DA wanted the process to be started afresh. What guarantees did you have that you will get a suitable candidate if the process started from afresh? Because when the process was ongoing, the party did not nominate on any of those candidates who were shortlisted. Did you have anyone in mind? Why didn't you approach that person in the initial process? Secondly, it's a follow-up on Lindsay's question about private members' bill. What do you think made you, the party, to be able to cooperate and work effectively with the ANC when on the process of ousted Public Protector Siviwe Gwarube? And what other, is there any other piece of legislation or any processes that you've worked together with the ANC the way you worked to oust Siviwe Gwarube? Thanks.
Okay. I'm going to allocate the PMB question to Annelie, and then John, can I give you the public protector, both of them, Advocate Gwarube and Advocate Gwarube, and working with the ANC. Over to you, Annelie.
Yes, in terms of the private members' bills, it is very frustrating, although one or two have passed, but not DA private members' bills. I think there was one by the ACDP. No, there was one the other day as well. So it is possible. It is a matter of appetite and will, and whether the ANC has any appetite to deal with a DA private members' bill. And what we've seen happening is that many of our private members' bills, all of a sudden them become executive bills because the argument will be in the committee, oh, but actually the executive is already busy working on this and we will include whatever you are proposing. So it then becomes not a private members' bill, but an executive bill. So that is the frustration, but we won't give up because that is what we're here to do. We are here to submit and table legislation that will be in the interest of the citizens of this country. So regardless of the frustrations, we will carry on. Okay, John, you will do the public protector.
Thank you very much. Just to close on the private members' bill, I think there's a new era coming in Parliament, in the 7th Parliament, and I think it's an exciting one. We are reaching the point where no party will have an outright majority after the next election. And that obviously drives the imperative to have private members' legislation, and the ability for bills like that to pass will make it far, far easier, because anything that gets done in the 7th Parliament is going to have to be done on the basis of compromise. No more will a party have the luxury of just simply having the numbers to bulldoze through their will. And I think the days of parties believing they have a monopoly on good ideas are going to fast come to an end. And I think that should excite all of us. Lulama, thanks very much for your question. I do believe that opening the process up again would have yielded more candidates. And this is the problem I have with political parties nominating candidates. I don't think that any political party should nominate a candidate. I think that the person, particularly for high constitutional office, like a public protector, should be somebody free of political taint. The reason why I don't think you get a good slew of excellent applicants is that the majority of people know out there from the exposure of the work of the Cadre Deployment Committee, and that's why we're taking on that issue so hard, and knowing how the ANC works, that it is a closed shop. They choose the candidate before the applications open, and they get behind that candidate. And you saw that the entire way through the interview process, that there was very, very clearly an imperative and directive to get their individual candidate through. So I don't think it's healthy for political parties to be nominating that person, because I think that person then has that cloud and taint on them whenever they make a judgment. And if they rule in favor of a certain party, they may say, oh, well, it's because they nominated you to be the public protector. That's why you're doing that. I think we need to insulate and firewall the high officers of the Constitution from political interference. And I think that we should ensure that people we appoint are not only fit and proper, but they do not have the taint of being this party's candidate or that party's candidate. I've been very clear from the beginning of my term as the leader of the opposition in Parliament. And I've said very, very clearly, and you will remember it from our first day in this very room where I announced what our process would be. We don't believe we have a monopoly on good ideas, and that we will listen and work with any party who puts on the table an idea that we agree with. And I think that the fact that the ANC supported originally our motion to start the impeachment process against Advocate Mkhwebane was a healthy development, because it was in the best interests of the country that we started the process to remove somebody who was patently unsuitable for that job. And it wasn't the DA's opinion, and it wasn't the ANC's opinion. It became an established fact of the courts. Mkhwebane lost 99.9% of the cases that she took on. She was overturned on review on almost every single one of her reports. And this is not a very, very good era, and not a very happy time for the Office of the Public Protector. And where constitutional office bearers do not fulfill their responsibilities, I think there's a duty on the holders of public office bearer, who these positions that we hold not in our own right, but on behalf of the people of South Africa, are given an opportunity to do the right thing and remove her. And I think it was the right move that was made, and I fundamentally will work with any party in the spectrum who wants to do the right thing in Parliament, who wants to make sure that the right decision with the country's best interest at heart is made. And that includes any one of the 13 parties sitting in the National Assembly. Thank you.
Right. I will be taking some more questions if there are any. I have received questions from Jason Felix from News 24. There's questions to me. What are the DA's major highlights in Parliament? And number 2, looking towards the 7th Parliament, what does the DA want to achieve? And then questions to John. Outside of Parliament, what have been the major successes of the DA in the past year? And what are the plans for the DA for the next year? And what are you hoping to achieve? Those are the only questions that I've got on the live stream. So Lulama, Bodi, and Lindsay.
It's not a follow-up, but if maybe I've missed it, John. I asked what guarantees did the DA have to want to start the process afresh, that a suitable candidate that you would have got a suitable candidate, because the understanding is that when the process like that is opened, those who are suitable qualified apply from the beginning. They don't wait for a second chance in case it's not there. So what guarantees that the party have that they will have received a suitable candidate had the process started afresh?
Okay.
Abongwe Kobokana from the SABC Radio News. John mentioned earlier on that they will be taking court actions with regard to the disclosure of the performance agreement for the ministers. And in some circles, this has been viewed as a political game by the DA in order to get this information. And one of the reasons that the compelling reasons behind that is to get an election trump card for the ANC next year, and your reactions to that. Thanks.
Looking to the 7th Parliament, should independent candidates make it into the House following yesterday's court rulings, how do you think that will change the landscape of the National Assembly and working towards there's electoral reform panel coming up and the way it might signal changes for the country's electoral system?
Cool. Thank you so much. If, John, you can handle Abongwe's question and Lindsay's question to some extent, I suppose, on the changing of the electoral. I don't know if you want to add anything about independence, or happy for John to handle it. Okay. And then obviously you'll just complete Lulama's question. Just to answering Jason's question about the highlights of the DA in Parliament, I think we've got a lot that we can be incredibly proud of. As much as we don't have the overwhelming majority, we were able to use the fact that we are the largest opposition party in Parliament. I think one of the key things was our work around the Pala matter, how we pushed for the ad hoc committee that would investigate the president, even when the Speaker sought to protect the President by declining our ad hoc committee request. we then still were at the forefront of pushing for the Section 89 panel. And that panel really illuminated a lot. And I think it was a historical moment in our parliament, because we had never had Section 89 rule, the Section 89 of the Constitution given effect to by the newly adopted rules. So we saw for the first time the rules being applied. We saw the report, the independent report, and of course it was then at the crucial time then blocked by the ANC to start impeachment proceedings. Our view was that if the president had nothing to hide, there would have been absolutely no reason why he would not want a probe into what has happened at Palapalo on his farm if he had literally nothing to hide. So that is the one highlight. The second one is obviously instituting Section 194 that Dr. Lotriet was leading on as our members on that committee. Again, a historical moment in South African Parliament where we saw the impeachment proceedings of a Chapter 9 head, and we were able to essentially get that over the line. And I think, Lulama, to your point about, how can, working with the ANC, ultimately, I mean, I think that the evidence around the incompetence of the public, of the previous public protector, were laid bare to see, and it would have been almost, impossible to justify why we would undertake an entire process for so many years on Section 194, and for that committee to arrive at that kind of finding, and then the ANC voting against it. And then, of course, we introduced a raft of rules as well in the Parliamentary Rules Committee, which we were seeking to give effect to the Zondo report's recommendation. Yes, and of course, while some of these were voted down, in fact, all of these were voted down, and none of the recommendations were implemented. But I think it's important that we don't give up on the basis that we simply don't have the numbers in Parliament to get certain things over the line. Because one, those things are a matter of public record. South Africans are able to see what their members of Parliament are doing for them in Parliament. And so if we simply sat back and said, well, we don't have the numbers, we simply won't introduce bills, we won't try to change the rules, then we're not doing our job. And so it is important because these things are a matter of public record. And now that we know that we are likely to see a decline in the ANC, we've built the muscle memory now. So it should really be relatively easy to get Parliament going again. And then, of course, we introduced a raft of PMBs, as I said. And also, lastly, there was the issue around the salary of the Secretary to Parliament. And that's also one of the things that we were at the forefront of exposing. Because as you'll recall, when the Secretary to Parliament was appointed a year ago, the Speaker and the NCOP Chair claimed that this STP would be receiving a 2.6 million rand salary. And it has been revealed in the media and that, in fact, the Secretary of Parliament is earning over 4 million rand a year. And that's something that, I mean, the misleading Parliament is an incredibly serious offence. And that's part of the reason why we've reported her to the Powers and Privileges Committee for an investigation. And should that investigation come back, we will act against the Speaker, because it cannot be that the head of the legislative arm is found wanting in terms of integrity, accountability, and transparency, because this is the very institution that is meant to hold government to account. So we are incredibly proud of the work that we've done over the past term. John, if you can handle the questions that I left.
Thank you very much. Firstly, to Jason, Felix from News 24. What am I proud about outside of the parliamentary environment? I think my ascension as the leader of the opposition was also the time I became leader of the DA. I inherited a party that was 12% in the polls, whose leader just walked off the job and trod all over the party on his way out the door, and was met with the headlines from, ironically, News 24 that famously said, the death of the DA. Well, here we are in 2023 on the cusp of an election where the DA is now up in the polls, up and polling regularly between 25 and 31%. And Brenthurst polls, the SRF polling, and other polls put us very, very clearly up there. And nobody talks about the 7th Parliament, and nobody talks about the next government in South Africa without mentioning the DA there. Not bad for a party that was destroyed and written off as dead at the time. We will be the second largest party in the country, and we will be, as we currently sit, just 7% away from the ANC, with the opportunity that if things go right over the next couple of months, we will overtake them. We've already overtaken them over the course of the last 2 years. As the largest party in urban South Africa, we intend to become the largest party in South Africa. I'm also incredibly proud of the fact that where we governed, we've been able to deliver to the people of South Africa. We haven't spoken about growing an economy and then gone on to wreck it. We haven't spoken about creating jobs and then gone to push more of our citizens into the unemployment queues. We've actually gone out there and delivered on the undertakings that we made. 300,000 new jobs in the Western Cape in the last year alone. An economy that's growing. A province that is fighting priority crime every single year to the point where it's down 14% year on year. Those are the things that make me proud about what the DA has achieved outside of Parliament, because it completely backs up our offer to South Africans next year, that if you want to rescue South Africa, you're going to need a strong DA at the heart of any new majority to be able to ensure that that delivery can take place. Lulama, perhaps I wasn't as clear as I intended to be. I believe that by opening up the process again, it would have given a very clear signal to other candidates that the chosen one, who everybody knew was going to be the ANC's chosen one going into the process, was perhaps not as unassailable as she would have been. And I think many, many more people would have probably put their hand up and said very, very clearly, well, maybe, this isn't a closed shop after all. And maybe my application will be assessed not on the political imperative of the party that has the majority on the committee, but on the actual merits of my candidacy. And I think that many, many more people would have subjected themselves to the process. I think when many people saw that list and saw clearly who the ANC's favourite candidate was, why would you put yourself through that tortuous process if you were a serious candidate, if you already knew who was going to get the job at the end of the day? And I think that by opening up again, it would have sent a clear signal, a flare out to competent, committed, fit and proper people, that this was actually going to be a process that was going to look for the best person for the job. We didn't have any guarantees. They say in politics, if you want a guarantee, buy a toaster. But we believe that it was the right thing to do at the time to move a motion of no confidence or impeachment motion against the public protector because of the wrecking that she was doing to not only that important office, but the constitutional mangling that she was up to in that office. And I think South Africa is richer for the fact that that motion succeeded and that we ultimately have seen the back of Ms. Mkhwebane, certainly from the holder of high constitutional office, although she now occupies the parliamentary benches in her red overalls. Bongiwe, we are very, very determined to get those. And I find it odd that someone would say that this is a game. It's not a game when 73 people are being murdered every single day because Beki clearly can't do his job properly. It's not a game when 8 million children go to bed hungry every day and 27.5% of all children in South Africa are stunted. That's not a game. That is life-threatening failure by government. It's not a game when we don't have electricity in our homes and in our businesses and in our factories, and they close their doors and move to other shores, taking thousands upon thousands of jobs with them. It's not a game when 82% of children at grade 4 level cannot read for meaning, and 63% of grade 6 teachers cannot pass the exams they set their children. That is not a game that has deep consequences for youth unemployability. It's not a game when, because the trade industry minister and the economic development cluster ministers cannot do their job, that we're sitting with a 42% unemployment rate and a 65% youth unemployment rate. These are not games. These are deadly serious things. And they all come back to one thing: ministerial performance. When each of these ministers don't do their jobs, South Africans bear the consequences. So those who want to trivialize it and call it a game can go ahead. We take these things deadly, deadly seriously because we witness every single day the deadly, deadly seriousness of the impact on ordinary citizens at home. hungry children, unemployable youth, load shedding. All of these things are deadly, deadly serious. We're not here to play games. We're here to rescue South Africa, and that will continue to be our focus. Thank you.
All right. I think that might be... Sorry?
Oh, sorry. Yes, let me deal with that. Sorry, Linz. Thanks. Yeah, look, I mean, I think that there's going to be a major problem next year. I think that you would know, you've been on the parliamentary beat probably longer than I've been here, that Parliament, everything from where you park to where your office is, to how long you speak in the House, to how many questions you can put, all comes down to one thing, proportionality. That's how Parliament is determined. And my worry is that Parliament has not prepared itself for the arrival of independence in this. You're essentially going to be injecting fish into a system designed for fowl. And I don't think Parliament has grappled with that nearly enough. How do you allocate speaking time, for instance? We have a minimum speaking time of 2 minutes in the House. But how do you allocate 2 minutes to an independent who's got scraped through on 42,000 votes, and then a party that's got 80 or 100,000 votes is given the same minimum speaking time? These things have not been grappled with. Parliamentary questions, how are these going to be determined? There's certain quotas that are used to determine question times to the president. All of these things are determined by proportionality and proportional strength. So I think that Parliament's going to have to grapple with this in the coming months, because if we go into a system where suddenly the fish arrive in the hen house and there's no provision for them, I think we're going to have a very, very big train smash here. So it needs to be dealt with. I happen to think that politics is a numbers game, and it's going to be very, very interesting to see how it works out. I heard one independent candidate telling everybody he was going to be on SCOPA, he was going to be on the health committee, he was going to be on transport. Well, that's not how it works. Parties and small one-man parties and independents will be on the committees where there's not enough quota for the bigger parties to fill those seats. And you don't choose which committee you sit on in Parliament. You get a certain allocation in terms of the number of seats you can fill. And in politics, size does matter. And in politics, numbers do matter. And so Parliament's going to have to grapple with this, because I don't think we're nearly ready for what it may mean. Thanks.
Lindsay, that's certainly going to have to form a significant part of the 7th Parliament, 6th Parliament legacy report. And my deep concern is that if we are likely to have a May election, then I'm not entirely sure when and how we're going to be grappling with those issues. Because if we are rising at the end of March for a May election, then we need to seriously get down to business. And there's so many things that are outstanding. There's legislation that is still outstanding, that the Speaker continues to allow the executive to introduce even at the last minute. There are investigations that are still outstanding. And now there's this, huge sort of undertaking. And the reality is that we didn't have to wait until this time. We knew that this matter was coming, and we should have prepared ourselves accordingly. And so I think it's going to be a very interesting time in the next couple of months. Colleagues, I think that might be it.
Just a follow-up, please, on what John said. John said that the DA is ready to become the biggest party in the next few months, overtaking the ANC. That's a very bold statement to make. And also, just tying into that, Ngwana recently said something along the line of the opposition shouldn't condition themselves as much, thinking that they would win the election and then cry foul if they don't win. So maybe just speak to that. And are you not overconfident saying that the DA will overtake the ANC as the biggest party in the next few months? And why do you think that? Thank you.
Would you like to?
Yeah. I say it because the polling showing that. We've already overtaken the ANC as the largest party in urban South Africa. And I believe that as the economic crisis continues, I believe as the unemployment crisis continues, I think as load shedding continues to bite in the economy, people are losing faith and confidence in the ANC. And more we're starting to see situations where they are in the low 40s and high 30s. With the DA polling last week at around about 31%, and during the registration, going into the registration weekend, we were able to show very clearly that we were just 7% behind the ANC. I'm confident that with the right campaign and with the right effort, as we intend to take to the streets of South Africa over the next while, including into the second registration weekend, after we won the first registration weekend with a massive differential turnout, particularly in key provinces like Gauteng, I think that we've got everything to play for. I think it's unambitious for a political party not to want to be able to become the largest party in the country. And when I say the largest party, I don't necessarily mean a party with 51%. The largest party in Poland is not going to form part of the government in the next election. But I am determined to make sure that the DA does everything it can to maximize our votes and that we portray to South Africans not only the failures of the ANC government, but very clearly the alternative, how we are rescuing the country, where we govern and how we intend to do it going forward. I am absolutely committed to taking the DA to being one of the largest parties in the country, and I'm absolutely convinced that if the current economic decline continues and the ANC continues in the current vein of weak leadership by the president, of pedestrian parliamentary performance, and as the economy starts to bite more and more South Africans, that we will be able to convince them that we have a far more compelling remedy to the daily problems that they sit with. And as that happens, I think many, many more South Africans, looking at our track record where we've been able to govern, will garner confidence that this is a party that is serious about rescuing the country. And even if we fall short of that goal, I am absolutely convinced that the DA is going to have one of its best election results in the history in post-democratic South Africa. Thank you.
Period is one where South Africans are going to be looking for less of the rhetoric and more delivery because of where we are as a country. And I think one of the things that we have going for us as a Democratic Alliance is the ability to show, instead of telling South Africans that we can provide a bit more jobs, that we can alleviate poverty, we can deliver services. And I think that's going to be the big selling point and the big differentiator between us and the ANC going into the election. Colleagues, thank you very, very much for coming through. We do appreciate it. And until next year, thank you.
Oh, do you want to tell them these books are available? Every home should have one.
Please, could you grab...
In this election, only the registered have the power. If you're tired of load shedding, register to vote. If you're tired of corruption, register to vote. If you're tired of the rising cost of living, register to vote. And if you're tired of a government that's continuously working against you, register to vote. Go to check.da.org.za and let's give power to the registered.
Thanks for watching. All across our beautiful country, people are joining forces to elect the new government that can rescue South Africa, help our rescue mission, and register to vote. Get help registering online now at check.da.org.za. Let's rescue South Africa.